That morning, the courthouse didn't feel like a place for justice. It felt like a room where people came to watch a man fall. Ethan Cole sat at the defense table so still you could have mistaken him for calm, until you noticed his hands. The way his fingers pressed into the wood, not shaking, just holding on. In a town that loved simple villains, the paperwork in the prosecutor's folder already had his life neatly boxed and labeled. Up on the bench, Judge Raymond Hale looked down from his wheelchair with eyes the color of winter glass. He didn't fidget. He didn't soften. He watched the room the way a man watches weather moving in. Then the door opened, and an 8-year-old boy stepped into the aisle like he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Noah's voice trembled, but he said the one sentence that made the whole courtroom laugh. The judge didn't. He leaned forward just enough to show it cost him, and in a voice meant for the child alone, he said something no one else was supposed to hear. Don't say another word, they're listening. And that's when Ethan realized the trial wasn't just about stolen money anymore. It was about something older, something buried, something that could get a child hurt if the wrong person blinked first. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, the kind of place where time didn't move forward so much as circle in on itself. People filed in as if they were attending a show that had been sold out for weeks. They came with coffee cups and folded arms, with the hard brightness in their eyes that said they'd already decided what they believed. They filled the benches shoulder to shoulder, leaning into one another's whispers, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with lunch. At the defense table sat Ethan Cole, too still to look calm and too controlled to look afraid. His suit didn't fit quite right. The jacket pulled at the shoulders when he breathed, and the tie knot was slightly crooked, as if someone else had tied it in a hurry. His hands rested on the table with the careful patience of a man who'd learned that any sudden motion could be misread as guilt. His gaze kept drifting toward the far end of the room, where the judge's bench rose above everyone like a cliff. It wasn't Ethan's first time in a courtroom. That was part of the tragedy of it. He'd sat in places like this before, as a witness and an accountant, as a man asked to explain numbers that the public didn't understand and didn't want to understand. Numbers made people angry when they were frightened. They wanted faces and villains and simple answers they could carry home. Today, he was the face. To the left, the prosecutor, Marla Dent, arranged her papers with a precision that felt almost ceremonial. She was the kind of attorney who didn't just argue a case, she performed certainty. Her hair was pinned back, her posture straight, her jaw set in a line that said the world was divided into winners and liars. She didn't look at Ethan the way a person looks at another person. She looked at him the way someone looks at a target they've already practiced hitting. Behind her sat a man the public adored, Victor Lang, wearing the gentle smile of a philanthropist who had shaken too many hands to be surprised by anything anymore. His presence wasn't required for the proceedings. Yet there he was, neat and composed, a silent endorsement of the story everyone wanted to hear. That the charity had been betrayed, that the money meant for children and clinics and hungry families had been siphoned away by a man who'd played accountant and stole like a thief in a movie. Victor's suit was expensive in a way that didn't announce itself. The fabric drank in the courtroom's light. He sat with his hands folded, and when he occasionally nodded, it looked like concern, like heartbreak over a moral failing that hurt him personally. Outside the building, news vans had lined the street. Inside, the cameras were banned, but the energy remained. The crowd carried it in with them, that electric sense that something dramatic was about to happen, and that they deserved to witness it. At precisely 10 o'clock, a side door opened, and the room shifted as one body. All faces turned toward the bench. Judge Raymond Hale entered without haste, escorted by a court officer who moved with the practiced care of someone who'd done this countless times. Hale was in a wheelchair, a simple, dark chair with scuffed footrests and a leather cushion that had lost its softness. He sat upright, his spine straight, his hands placed on the armrests as if the chair were a throne he refused to acknowledge. His hair was silver and close-cropped, his face carved with lines that did not look like they'd been earned from laughter. His eyes were the cold, steady gray of a winter sky that never promised mercy. When he looked at the room, it felt less like a glance and more like a measurement. People quieted. Even those who'd come for entertainment straightened as if something in him demanded it. The bailiff called the court to order, and everyone rose. Hale didn't. He couldn't. Or rather, he didn't. There was a difference, and Hale insisted on it. When the room sat again, his gaze moved to Ethan and stayed there a fraction longer than anyone could openly explain. Not long enough to be noticed by the crowd, but long enough for Ethan to feel as if something invisible had tightened. Ethan swallowed. His throat was dry, and he hated himself for it. Marla Dent stood, the sound of her chair legs against the floor sharp in the sudden hush. She began with the tone of a person delivering a statement of fact rather than an argument. She spoke of missing funds. She spoke of forged approvals. She spoke of careful digital trails that led back, always, to Ethan Cole. She walked the jury through a narrative like a tour guide leading tourists through ruins, pointing out where the tragedy happened, explaining how the disaster could have been prevented, making sure everyone understood who to blame. As she spoke, Ethan watched the jury. There were 12 of them. 12 ordinary lives suddenly tasked with deciding whether one man would lose the rest of his. Some looked uncomfortable, as if they'd wandered into a storm. Others looked eager, leaning forward slightly whenever Marla's voice sharpened. Marla held up printed pages, transaction records, authorization logs, email threads, evidence that looked clean and final. The kind of evidence that, to people who didn't understand systems and backdoors and how easily a signature could be mimicked, felt like truth itself. At one point, she paused, allowing the moment to breathe, then turned her attention toward the gallery. "We trusted him," she said, and the word trusted landed like a stone. "We trusted him with money, meant for the most vulnerable." A murmur spread through the benches. Not sympathy, not sorrow. Something closer to satisfaction. Like a crowd watching a storm finally hit the house everyone had been gossiping about. Ethan's attorney, a tired man named Grant Whitaker, rose to object once, then twice. But Hale's expression never changed. The objections were overruled with a simple lift of Hale's chin, the motion minimal and absolute. Ethan felt his pulse in his ears. He turned his head just slightly toward Grant, as if to ask without speaking, "What do we do now?" Grant's mouth tightened. He shuffled his notes like a man buying time, but time was not a currency Hale allowed in his courtroom. When Marla finally sat, she did it with the composure of someone who believed the case had already been won. She didn't look triumphant. She looked finished. The defense rose. Grant began in a voice that tried to be steady, tried to carry authority. But it wasn't his voice that mattered. Everyone in the room was waiting for Ethan to unravel, to slip, to show anger or panic, something they could point to afterward and say, "See? That's what guilt looks like." Grant spoke about Ethan's history, years of clean audits, a modest salary, no lavish spending, no secret accounts that anyone had found. He spoke about Ethan's father being ill and Ethan being the sole caregiver. He spoke about how easy it was, in a system run by multiple departments, for records to be altered and blame to be assigned. And while Grant spoke, Victor Lang sat behind Marla with his hands folded and his face composed. He didn't smirk. He didn't roll his eyes. He performed compassion as if it were a moral duty. Hale listened, unmoving, his fingers resting on the wheelchair's armrests. Yet there was something in him that wasn't still. It began as a tightening around his eyes, subtle enough to be missed, a small shift in his jaw, a muscle working near his temple, like a man suppressing pain. Ethan noticed anyway, because Ethan had spent his life noticing what people tried to hide. Grant finished by asking the court to remember that allegations were not convictions, that the law required proof beyond doubt, that Ethan was not a story for the public to enjoy, but a human being whose life would be destroyed if the court chose wrong. The words floated out into the room and did not land. The crowd was restless. Someone in the back exhaled a laugh. Quiet, not malicious enough to be called an outburst, but sharp enough to cut. Another person chuckled, as if the defense's plea for fairness were naive, as if the idea of doubt were inconvenient. Hale's gaze moved to the gallery. One look, flat and direct, and the small laughter died. But it left behind its stain, lingering in the air like smoke. Ethan felt heat rise up his neck. He wanted to stand, to shout that none of them knew him. None of them knew what it was to hold your father's hand in a hospital room and feel the bones too thin under the skin. None of them knew what it was to work nights so a charity could stay afloat, to miss birthdays and anniversaries because budgets didn't care about the calendar. But he didn't move. He'd learned that the wrong emotion at the wrong moment could become proof. The proceedings moved forward. Witnesses were referenced. Documents were admitted. The language of law, dry, technical, relentless, ground the room down to inevitability. It was as if the outcome had already been written, and the court was merely reading it aloud. And through it all, Hale remained a figure carved from stone, a man in a chair who seemed to tower over everyone anyway. But inside Hale, beneath the stillness, something was shifting. He had seen Ethan Cole before, though not in this room. Years ago, in an entirely different context. Hale's mind didn't offer the memory as a neat picture. It came in fragments. Fluorescent light, the scent of antiseptic, the sharp pain behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with what he'd signed. A case, a decision. A man he'd sentenced too quickly because the evidence had looked clean and final. A man who'd later been found dead. Hale had told himself it had been the man's weakness, not his own judgment. Hale had told himself the system worked, that he had no time for softness. But guilt, he'd learned, didn't care what a person told himself. It settled into the body. It lived in the joints and the nerves. It made a strong man feel heavy in ways that had nothing to do with paralysis. Hale had not always been in a wheelchair. The public story was an accident, a cruel twist of fate that left a brilliant judge confined. The truth was more complicated, and Hale guarded it like a weapon. He kept his hands on the chair's armrests because it reminded him of where he was. It reminded him he couldn't afford to lose control. When Ethan looked up at him again, just once, brief and desperate, Hale felt something he hated feeling in court. Doubt, not about the law, about the people who claimed to serve it. Hale's eyes drifted, almost imperceptibly, toward Victor Lang. Victor met the judge's gaze without flinching. The slightest polite nod, the smile of a man who respected authority. And Hale, for a heartbeat, saw a different Victor, a younger Victor, a man standing too close during a private conversation, saying the right things while his eyes said something colder. Hale's fingers curled slightly against the leather armrest. In the front row of the gallery, a woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue, quietly performing grief for the charity's stolen money. Two teenagers behind her whispered and grinned, as if this were a trial they'd stream later for fun. Ethan's chest tightened. The air felt thinner. He tried to steady himself by thinking about his father, his real father, not the abstract, sick parent mentioned in court. The man who had taught him how to fix a leaking sink, how to fold a flag, how to hold your temper when you wanted to scream. That father was at home, weakened by illness, unaware that strangers were laughing at his son like a joke. Ethan's hands, still on the table, pressed into the wood. Not enough to shake, not enough to betray him, just enough to remind his own body that he was still here. Hale looked down at Ethan's hands. People often believed that a judge saw only the big gestures, the outbursts, the tears, the confessions. Hale had built his reputation on noticing the smaller things. The way a witness's foot pointed toward the exit, the way a defendant avoided a certain word, the way a liar tended to fill silence with details. Ethan's stillness wasn't the stillness of a man hiding a secret. It was the stillness of a man bracing for impact. Hale could not say that aloud. Not yet. Not without proof. Not without risking something he had spent years protecting. He inhaled slowly, felt the tightness in his chest again, and forced it down. The court clerk read the next item on the docket. The judge's calendar moved like a machine, grinding toward the moment the public wanted most. The verdict, the punishment, the satisfying conclusion that made the world feel fair again. Hale lifted his eyes to Ethan once more. And in that look, there was something dangerously human. Ethan saw it, a flicker. The briefest crack in the ice. It was enough to make Ethan's throat burn. Because if the judge had doubt, it meant Ethan wasn't completely alone. And if Hale had doubt, it also meant Hale had something to lose. Hale's gaze returned to the room, and his voice finally cut through the tension. Calm, clipped, controlled. Proceed. The word was ordinary, but the way he said it felt like the turning of a key. Ethan sat there and waited, the way a man waits in the seconds before a collision, listening to the room around him breathe and shift and whisper. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, beyond the crowd and the cameras and the story they were all hungry to consume, an 8-year-old boy was running toward this building with a heart full of terror and a sentence on his tongue that would change everything. Noah Cole ran the last block as if the air itself were chasing him. He was 8 years old, small for his age, the kind of kid adults called wiry, as if that made the fear in his chest sound less serious. His jacket was unzipped even though the morning had teeth in it, and his shoes slapped the pavement in an uneven rhythm because one lace had come loose and he didn't dare stop to fix it. He could taste pennies in his mouth from breathing too hard. Behind him, the world kept moving in its ordinary way. Cars rolled through intersections. A woman walked a dog that didn't know anything about courtrooms. A man leaned against a storefront, scrolling on his phone like nothing in the universe could be urgent enough to interrupt his thumb. Noah hated them for it, not because they were doing anything wrong, but because they didn't know what it felt like. When your whole life narrowed down to one door, you had to reach before it closed forever. He had left his grandfather on the couch with a blanket tucked around his legs and a glass of water on the coffee table. His grandfather's hands had trembled when Noah said he was going to the courthouse. The old man tried to argue, tried to sit up, but his body didn't listen the way it used to. "Your father told you to stay," the old man had rasped. Noah had nodded, because he didn't like lying, and because he did not know how to explain to an adult that staying felt like watching a house burn from the sidewalk. Then he had done what desperate children do. He had gathered the few things that made him feel brave and stuffed them into his pocket like charms. A small USB drive, a crumpled paper with writing on it that didn't fully make sense to him, but he recognized the signature at the bottom because he'd seen it on letters and envelopes that came to the house. A name that belonged to a man everyone on the news called a saint, Victor Lang. Noah didn't know what embezzlement meant. He didn't understand chain of custody. He didn't understand why grown-ups used long words when the truth felt simple in his body. He only understood that his father hadn't slept in 3 nights, that his father's voice had sounded wrong on the phone, too careful, too gentle, like he was trying not to frighten Noah even as the world was breaking. That his father had said, in a quiet rush, "Noah, no matter what happens, don't come here. Promise me." Noah had promised, and then he had broken the promise. Because there are some promises children are not built to keep. At the courthouse steps, Noah slowed, suddenly aware of the building's size. The doors were tall and heavy. The stone columns looked like they could hold up the sky. Men in suits went in and out without looking down. For one sharp second, he wondered if a place like this could swallow him whole and never notice. Then he thought about his father sitting alone at that table, about strangers laughing as if he were a joke. His feet moved again. Inside, the lobby was a cold sea of echoing voices. A security line snaked across the floor. Noah tried to join it, but the people around him shifted away, with the casual irritation adults reserve for anything that disrupts their plan. A guard noticed him and frowned. "Where's your parent?" Noah lifted his chin the way he'd seen his father do when someone tried to talk down to him. "In there," Noah said, and pointed toward the courtroom doors as if pointing could create permission. The guard's frown deepened. "You can't—" Noah didn't wait for the sentence to finish. He darted away, slipping between bodies with a speed that came from being small and used to adults not seeing you until you were already gone. He found the hallway outside the courtroom and stopped for a breath. His lungs burned. His hands shook. He pressed them to his knees, trying to steady himself, trying to remember what he was supposed to do when he got in there. Tell them the truth. The problem was that the truth, as Noah understood it, was not a neat line. It was a tangle of overheard phone calls, a sound of anger behind a closed door, his father's face going pale when a man's name appeared on the screen. It was the way Victor Lang's voice had changed when he thought no one was listening. Noah had been sitting at the top of the stairs 2 nights ago, half hidden behind the banister, because he was supposed to be in bed, but he couldn't sleep. He'd heard his father in the kitchen, speaking low into the phone. "I can't," his father had said. "I won't sign it." A pause, and then a different voice, smooth at first, almost friendly. "You don't get to decide that," the voice had said. "You get to do what you're told." Noah didn't know how to describe a voice like that. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even harsh. It was the kind of voice that made you feel stupid for being scared while you were being scared. Then the voice had dropped into something colder. "If you love your father," it had said, "you'll stop making problems." Noah's father had gone very still. Noah could hear it, that silence that happens when a person is trying not to show fear. "My father has nothing to do with this." "That's where you're wrong," the voice had replied, calm as a hand on the back of your neck. After the call ended, his father had stood at the sink for a long time, staring at nothing. Noah had watched him from the stairs and felt something in his chest shift into a hard little knot. That knot was what brought him here. Noah pushed open the courtroom door. The room was larger than it had looked on television. The air inside felt thicker, heavy with perfume and aftershave and old wood. All those faces turned at once, surprised to see a child. The sound of the proceedings didn't stop immediately, but it wavered, like a song interrupted by a wrong note. Ethan turned first. For a moment, Noah saw pure fear on his father's face. Not fear for himself. Noah recognized that difference immediately. This was the fear a parent feels when the one thing they have left to protect suddenly steps into danger. "Noah," Ethan said, not loud but with a warning in it that made Noah's stomach drop. The bailiff started forward. The prosecutor lifted her brows in a look of polite disbelief. The crowd stirred, murmuring the way people do when they smell a twist coming. Judge Hale's gaze settled on Noah, and the room felt different under that stare, like the temperature had changed by a degree. Noah walked forward anyway. He didn't plan the words. They came out of the knot in his chest, out of the place where love and panic mix until they feel like the same thing. "Let my dad go," Noah said, his voice cracking on the last word. He swallowed hard and forced the next sentence through. "If you don't, I'll make you walk." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the laughter came. Not everyone. Not cruelly from every mouth. But enough that Noah felt it hit him like a shove. It started as a few snorts, a couple of amused exhalations, and then it spread through the benches like permission. A little boy threatening a courtroom. A little boy challenging a judge in a wheelchair. To them it was absurd. To them it was entertainment. Noah's face went hot. His eyes stung. He clenched his fists so tight and his nails bit his palms because he refused to cry in front of people who thought his father was a punchline. His father half rose in his seat, reaching toward him without moving his feet, as if he could pull Noah back with sheer will. "Please," Ethan whispered. And in that one word, Noah heard everything his father couldn't say out loud. "Stay safe. Don't do this. I can survive it. I can't survive losing you." But Noah had already stepped over the line where children become something else for a moment. Something fierce and reckless and bright with love. Judge Hale's face didn't change. His expression stayed composed, almost bored. But his hands, on the wheelchair's armrests, tightened until his knuckles showed pale beneath his skin. He did not smile with the crowd. He did not laugh. He watched Noah like he was watching a match being held too close to dry paper. "Who is this child?" Marla Dent asked, her voice carrying an edge of irritation, as if Noah were a fly that had wandered into her meal. "My son," Ethan said. And the shame in his voice was a weapon used against him. The shame of being exposed as a father who could not keep his child out of harm. Hale's eyes remained on Noah. "And what is it you think you can do, son?" Noah's throat worked. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his wrists. He glanced at his father, saw the pleading in Ethan's eyes, and for an instant he almost faltered. Then Noah thought about his grandfather on the couch, too weak to stand, staring at the door as if waiting for a knock that might ruin them all. He reached into his pocket. The USB drive felt warm from his skin. "I have something," Noah said, and he held it up. A tiny piece of plastic, a stupid-looking thing that, in Noah's hand, felt heavier than it should. More laughter, softer now, less confident. People leaned forward. "What's on it?" someone whispered. Noah's hand shook, but he held it higher. "The truth." Victor Lang's smile didn't disappear. It stayed right where it was, fixed and gentle. But something behind it moved, a subtle tightening around the eyes. a flicker so fast it would have been missed by anyone not looking for it. Hale saw it. Hale had spent his life studying that exact kind of flicker. Noah turned his head slightly and looked up at the judge. The bench loomed above him, the seal of the court behind Hale like a warning. Noah's voice dropped, and in the hush that followed, even the people who had laughed leaned in. "I know you did something bad once," Noah said. "I heard grown-ups say it. I heard you on the news." A wave of discomfort ran through the room. The laughter vanished as quickly as it had come, replaced by that sharp tension people feel when a child says something they weren't supposed to know. Hale's face remained still, but the air around him changed. Ethan's eyes widened. "Noah, stop." Noah didn't look away from Hale. His fear was still there, but it had been joined by a kind of stubborn clarity. "You're in that chair because you hate yourself," Noah said. Not as an insult, but as a fact he'd felt in his bones the moment he saw the judge's hands gripping the armrests like they were the only thing holding him together. "You don't have to keep hating yourself. Just don't let them take my dad." For a moment, the courtroom forgot to breathe. Marla Dent stood so fast, her chair scraped loudly. "Objection. This is inappropriate. Remove the child." The bailiff moved forward. Hale raised one hand. It was a small gesture, but it stopped the bailiff as if a wall had come down. Hale looked at Noah as if weighing something far larger than the child in front of him. His eyes, cold a minute ago, held a different kind of light now. Not warmth, not kindness. Something older, something like recognition. "Bring the USB to the bench," Hale said. Victor Lang shifted in his seat just slightly, the way a man shifts when he feels the floor tilt under him. Ethan stared at the judge, shock and hope fighting for space in his face. Noah took a step forward. His legs felt weak, his stomach churned. But he walked anyway, toward the bench, toward the judge who had not laughed. As Noah moved, Hale watched him with a focus that looked almost painful. Because Hale, beneath the black robe and the iron reputation, remembered what it felt like to believe justice was something you could reach if you ran fast enough. And he also remembered what it felt like to fail someone who ran. Noah reached the front of the room and held up the USB with both hands, like an offering. Hale leaned forward slightly, and the movement made his shoulder tense, as if the simple act of leaning cost him something. The clerk took the drive and placed it carefully on the bench. Hale's gaze flicked once more to Victor Lang. Victor's smile remained. His eyes did not. "Court will recess," Hale said, his voice calm enough to pretend this was routine. 10 minutes. The sound of his gavel did not need to be loud. The authority in his tone was enough. People erupted into whispers as they stood, the room suddenly alive with speculation. The laughter was gone, replaced by a hunger even sharper. The hunger of people who sense a scandal shifting shape. Ethan grabbed Noah by the shoulders gently, not shaking him, not scolding him, just holding him as if he had to confirm Noah was real. "What did you do?" Ethan breathed, his eyes wet with fear and love and something like awe. Noah looked up at his father, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, he let his voice soften. "I'm not letting them take you," he said. Ethan pulled him closer, pressing his forehead to Noah's hair for a brief second that felt like prayer. Across the room, Victor Lang stood with controlled grace, speaking quietly to Marla Dent. Their faces were close, their mouths careful. People watching would have assumed they were discussing legal strategy. Hale watched them too. He watched the way Victor's hand rested for a moment on Marla's arm, not affectionate, but possessive, like a reminder. He watched Marla's jaw tighten, as if she had swallowed something sharp. And deep inside Hale, beneath the practiced calm, something long buried began to wake. Not pity, not kindness, the instinct to hunt. During the recess, the courtroom did not empty so much as rearrange itself. People poured into the hallway with their voices turned up, as if the walls outside the courtroom could absorb gossip better than the wooden benches inside. Reporters who had been waiting near the lobby lifted their heads the moment they saw faces spilling out. They didn't have cameras in the room, but they had instincts, and instincts told them something had changed. Inside, at the defense table, Ethan kept Noah close. Not in a way meant to hide him. Noah was past hiding now, but in a way meant to anchor himself. Ethan's hands rested on the boy's shoulders like he was holding the only thing that still made sense. "You can't do that," Ethan murmured, leaning close so the court officers wouldn't hear. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. They kept flicking toward the bench where the USB sat like a live wire. Noah's chin trembled once, then steadied. "I had to," he whispered back. "He said Grandpa would get hurt." Ethan froze. It wasn't dramatic. It was a simple, involuntary stillness, as if someone had pulled a string inside him and his body had tightened around it. "Who said that?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer in the way a person knows the shape of a blade before it touches skin. Noah didn't say the name at first. He swallowed, then glanced toward the back of the room where Victor Lang had been sitting. Victor was no longer in his seat. He stood near the clerk's station, speaking softly to Marla Dent, with a calm that looked like professionalism from a distance and felt like control up close. Noah's voice came out small. "Mr. Lang." Ethan's breath left him. For a moment his mind tried to reject it, because Victor Lang was the man people trusted, the man whose foundation had put food in pantry shelves and paid for hospital wings, the man whose face was always on banners, smiling beside sick children and ribbon cuttings. But Ethan's body did not reject it. Ethan's body recognized danger the way it recognizes smoke. Ethan had worked under Victor's umbrella for 3 years. He had watched how Victor made people feel seen, how he remembered a donor's spouse's name and the exact grade of their child, how he took a waitress's hand like her opinion mattered. Victor didn't just collect money. He collected loyalty. And loyalty, Ethan had learned too late, was not always given freely. Sometimes it was taken. Across the room, Victor's gaze slid toward Ethan and Noah. The smile remained, warm and sad, the expression of a man burdened by betrayal. Yet his eyes held a different message, one that never needed words. "You shouldn't have brought the boy." Ethan felt a tightness at the base of his skull, a pressure that made him want to stand up and knock that smile off Victor's face. But he didn't move. He knew how quickly a father's anger could be turned into a weapon against him. Noah didn't look away. For all his shaking, there was something in him that had hardened. Not cruelty, not bravado. A child's pure refusal to accept the story adults were trying to write. At the bench, Judge Hale sat alone now, the clerk and bailiff hovering at a respectful distance. He had insisted the USB stay on the bench during recess. He had insisted the courtroom doors remain closed. A handful of people tried to protest. Marla, of course, with a legal argument. Victor with a softer appeal, all concerned eyes and careful language. But Hale had shut them down with 2 clipped sentences and a stare that reminded them the courtroom belonged to him. Now Hale looked at the USB as if it were an object from an earlier life, something that could either confirm what he had begun to suspect or force him to swallow his doubt and keep going. He hated that a child had brought it. He hated that it mattered. Because once a child was involved, the weight of consequences changed. Mistakes were no longer abstract. They had a face, small hands, a voice cracking in public. Hale's fingers hovered over the drive. His hands were steady, but his forearms ached with the quiet burn that came from years of his body refusing to obey him the way it once did. He could feel the chair beneath him, the reminder of every limit he had learned to accept. He had also learned to use limits as camouflage. From the hallway came the faint stir of voices. From inside the room came the sound of paper shifting, the clerk adjusting files. Hale's mind offered him the memory he always tried to keep buried. A man in a different courtroom years ago, eyes wide, insisting he was innocent. Clean evidence. A neat narrative. A public hungry for someone to punish. Hale had believed the record. Hale had signed the decision. The man had died before the appeal could be heard. Afterward, Hale had told himself that he hadn't killed him. The law had done what the law did. But the human part of Hale, the part he kept behind the bench and the robe and the cold voice, had never truly accepted that. And then came the accident, the official story, the one the newspapers preferred. A car running a red light. A judge rushed to the hospital. A life changed in a single night. The truth was uglier, and Hale had kept it quiet because ugly truths always belonged to people like Victor Lang. Hale finally nodded to the clerk. "Plug it in," he said. Marla stepped forward. "Your Honor, with respect, we need counsel present for any—" "You'll have your chance," Hale replied without looking at her. Victor's voice slid in, smooth as oil. "Raymond, let's not do something hasty. If this is a stunt—" The use of the first name was deliberate. It was a reminder of history, of favors, of debts. Hale's eyes lifted, and for a moment the room felt like it had tipped. "Do not address me that way in my courtroom," Hale said. Victor's smile tightened. "Of course." The clerk connected the drive to a secure court laptop. A file window opened, showing a handful of audio clips and one video file. The names were plain, as if someone had saved them quickly, without artistry. Noah had told the truth about one thing. It wasn't dressed up. It wasn't polished. It was raw. It was what panic produces when it has nowhere else to go. Hale watched the cursor hover over the first audio clip. He felt something like dread ripple through him, not because he feared what he would hear, but because he feared what it would demand of him afterward. The clerk clicked play. At first, it was indistinct. Muffled room tone, the soft scrape of movement, the hiss of someone breathing too close to a microphone. Then a voice emerged, low and calm, threaded with impatience. "You don't get to be noble on my dime," the voice said. Ethan's face drained of color. Marla's lips parted as if she was about to speak and realized she couldn't. Victor did not move. The voice continued, sharper now. "You sign what's in front of you. You take the blame. You go quiet. And your father stays safe." A pause. Another voice. Ethan's voice, strained and thin, like a man trying to keep his dignity from cracking. "You're asking me to ruin my life." The first voice laughed softly, not with humor, but with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed consequences belonged to other people. "Your life isn't the one I'm discussing," the voice said. "It's your father's." Noah's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry. He watched his father's face, watching the way his father's composure finally began to splinter, piece by piece. Marla's gaze snapped to Victor, searching for some sign that this wasn't what it sounded like. Because prosecutors are trained to believe evidence, yet they're also trained to protect their own narrative, even from reality. Victor's expression remained careful, benevolent, confused even. He played the part so well that, for half a second, the room almost believed him. But Hale had spent too long watching men like Victor to be fooled by the performance. Hale didn't look at Victor's smile. He looked at Victor's hands. Victor's fingers were locked together so tightly the knuckles had gone faintly white. It was a small thing, but Hale's life had been built on noticing small things. The audio clip ended. Silence filled the courtroom, thick and heavy. Even the clerk seemed afraid to breathe. Hale shifted his gaze to Ethan. "Is that your voice?" Ethan swallowed. His pride fought with his instinct to protect Noah, to protect his father at home, to protect whatever fragile safety remained. "It is," Ethan said, the words barely above a whisper. "And the other voice?" Hale asked, though the answer sat in the room like a shadow everyone could see. Ethan's eyes flicked to Victor. Ethan's jaw tightened as if he could bite back fear. "It's Victor Lang," Ethan said. Victor's smile finally changed, not disappearing, but turning. It became something colder, something that belonged to a man deciding which mask to wear next. "That's absurd," Victor said softly, almost sadly. "That could be anyone. AI can imitate voices now. Anyone could fabricate this." Marla's head turned sharply. She looked at Hale, then at Ethan, then at the file on the screen. Her confidence, so solid an hour ago, started to wobble at the edges. She didn't want to believe she'd been used. Her pride rebelled, but her instincts had always been sharper than her ego, and her instincts could feel the room shifting under her feet. Hale leaned back slightly, his gaze fixed on Victor. "You're right. Voices can be imitated." Victor inclined his head, as if grateful. Hale continued, calm as a man reading a weather report. "But records leave patterns. Devices leave fingerprints. Timestamps tell stories. And I have a deep dislike for stories that rely on my ignorance." Victor's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "What are you suggesting, Your Honor?" "I'm suggesting," Hale said, "that we bring in the custodian of records for the Foundation immediately." Marla stepped forward, recovering. "Your Honor, that would take time. We're in the middle of—" Hale cut her off. "We are in the middle of nothing. This court is not a machine for anyone's convenience." Victor let out a careful breath, the first hint of irritation slipping through the politeness. "Raymond, Your Honor, this is dangerous. You're risking public trust." Hale's mouth tightened. "Public trust is already at risk. It always has been." His gaze drifted just once, toward the gallery doors. He could feel the hungry crowd outside, feel the story being whispered into existence. Then Hale looked back at Victor, and his voice dropped half a degree into something more personal. "I know what you do," Hale said. "I just never had proof." Victor didn't flinch. He smiled again, slower this time, as if indulging an old friend's paranoia. "Proof is a funny thing," Victor said. "Sometimes people see what they want to see." Hale held Victor's gaze without blinking. "And sometimes," Hale said, "people stop looking away." The clerk's hand hovered over the next file. Hale didn't nod yet, because he could feel it now, the shape of the coming storm. The part of him that had stayed dormant for years, buried under guilt and pain and the heavy comfort of resignation, was waking, not as anger, but as purpose. Across the room, Ethan stared at the bench, not daring to hope too fully. Noah leaned against his father's side, trembling, but still standing. Victor stood perfectly still, a man holding his breath while the world decided whether to believe him. In the pause before the next file played, Hale's eyes flicked to Noah, A child had walked into his courtroom and dared to name the monster. Hale knew what happened next in stories like this. Either the monster fell, or the child paid for speaking. Hale's jaw tightened. He had failed a man once. He had watched the consequence of that failure bury itself into his body and turn into a chair he could not escape. He would not fail another innocent person if he could help it. Not again. Judge Raymond Hale had learned to keep his face quiet. It was an old skill, forged long before the wheelchair, long before the headlines, back when he still believed a man could be hard enough to outrun regret. In court, expression was a leak. A single flinch could become a headline. A single softened glance could be interpreted as weakness. Hale had built a career on the illusion that nothing touched him. But when the courtroom doors finally closed and the bailiff guided him through the private corridor behind the bench, the quiet he wore in public began to slip at the edges. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough that the air felt heavier. His chambers were plain, not humble, not lavish. A judge's office was never about comfort. It was about gravity. Dark wood, stacks of files, a few framed certificates that no one ever read, a window that looked out on the city like the city owed him an explanation. The bailiff asked if he needed anything. Hale shook his head. The door closed. The lock clicked, and Hale was alone with the one thing he had spent years avoiding: his own thoughts. He rolled toward his desk, stopped, and sat there for a moment without moving. The pain in his legs was the kind of pain that made no logical sense. Nerves screaming in a place that could not answer. It was his body's cruel way of reminding him of what he'd lost. Sometimes, when the courthouse was empty and the lights were low, he could almost convince himself he felt his feet. A phantom sensation, like memory pretending to be touch. He gripped the armrests until his hands ached, not because he needed the chair to hold him, but because he needed something to hold on to. On his desk sat a photograph face down. He hadn't displayed it. He didn't keep it out for visitors. It lived there like a secret kept in plain sight, the kind that only mattered when you were alone. Hale turned it over. The photo was old enough that the edges had begun to soften. Two men stood shoulder to shoulder at a fundraising gala, both younger, both smiling at a camera, as if the world had never asked anything difficult of them. Hale wore a tux he had rented and a smile he had practiced. Beside him stood Victor Lang, clean-cut and bright-eyed, already radiating that easy charm people mistook for goodness. Behind them, blurred in the background, was a banner for the foundation, the kind of banner that promised hope in large letters. Hale stared at Victor's face in the photo until the room seemed to bend around it. He didn't hate Victor the way some men hated their enemies. Hate required the comfort of certainty. What Hale felt was colder and more complicated. The knowledge of a predator you'd once mistaken for a friend. He flipped the photo over again. On the back, in faded ink, a date, a place, and a note written in Victor's handwriting. For everything. Hale's jaw tightened. His mind tried to keep the memory distant, but it came anyway. It always did when Victor was near. A late-night meeting in a private office. The scent of whiskey. The quiet hum of a city outside a window. Hale, still walking then, still believing the law was a clean blade. Victor standing too close, speaking softly about how public trust was fragile, how scandals destroyed charities, how sometimes a single man had to take the fall so the mission could survive. Hale remembered the file on the desk. Evidence that looked perfect, numbers that lined up, emails that read like confession. He remembered the man in the file, a mid-level manager, a father, someone with a face ordinary enough to be disposable. Hale remembered thinking, for a brief moment, that something felt too neat, that the story was too smooth. Then Victor had said, with that same calm voice Noah had described, "If we let this drag out, the donors run, clinics close, kids lose treatment. Are you willing to be the reason that happens?" It was a kind of blackmail that didn't feel like blackmail. It felt like responsibility. Hale had signed. The man was convicted. And a week later, Hale received the news that the man had been found dead in his garage. A note left behind with 3 words written in a shaking hand. "I tried." Hale had read those words in silence. He told himself he couldn't save everyone. He told himself the system couldn't pause for grief. But something in him had cracked. Then came the accident. The official version was clean and easy for the public to digest. A vehicle ran a red light. A judge's life changed. Tragic, but random. The real version lived in Hale's bones like a second spine. He remembered leaving the courthouse late, too tired to be careful. He remembered headlights, closer than they should have been. He remembered a moment of certainty, sharp and bright. This wasn't an accident. And then darkness and pain, and waking up in a hospital bed while Victor Lang stood beside him with sympathy on his face and relief in his eyes. Victor had called it fate. Victor had called it tragedy. Victor had called himself a friend. Hale had accepted the wheelchair, accepted the pity, accepted the slow shrinking of his world, because accepting it meant he didn't have to look directly at what it implied. Until today. Until an 8-year-old boy walked into his courtroom and spoke Hale's hidden shame aloud without knowing its shape. Hale closed his eyes. The silence in the room pressed against him. In the adjacent hallway, footsteps moved past his door. Somewhere inside the courthouse, people were already telling a new version of the story. A boy. A USB drive. A beloved philanthropist suddenly questioned. Hale opened his eyes again, and the look in them had changed. There was a difference between a man who suspected and a man who decided. He reached for the phone on his desk and dialed an internal extension. "Bring Lena Park to my chambers," Hale said when the clerk answered. "Now." There was hesitation on the other end. Lena Park was a court reporter and administrative clerk. Efficient, quiet. The kind of person who kept the machinery of justice running without anyone noticing her name. She was also, Hale had noticed, the woman who had stood up too abruptly when Noah mentioned a log. Hale had seen fear move through her like a wave. Fear had a source. He ended the call and waited. While he waited, across the building, Victor Lang was not waiting at all. Victor moved through the private hallway like it belonged to him, because in a way it always had. He spoke softly to Marla Dent as they walked, his hand guiding her by the elbow, a gesture that looked supportive and felt like a claim. Marla's face stayed composed, but her heart was not. She had built her career on winning, on being right, on standing in front of juries and painting certainty so brightly that doubt felt foolish. And now that certainty had been punctured by a child with trembling hands. "I don't like surprises," Marla said quietly. Victor's voice remained smooth. "Neither do I." "Was that you on the recording?" she asked. And she hated herself for asking, hated the need in her tone. She wanted him to deny it in a way that felt real. Victor didn't answer the question directly. He didn't need to. He only looked at her with a patience that made her feel young and controllable. "Do you want to be the prosecutor who took down a thief?" he asked. "Or the prosecutor who embarrassed herself in front of the whole city because she chased a child's fantasy?" Marla's mouth tightened. "If this becomes public, it won't," Victor said, gentle as a lullaby. Not if you do exactly what we discussed. Marla hated that word most of all. Victor stopped near a service door and pulled out his phone. He tapped a name and listened. When the person answered, Victor's voice softened further, as if speaking to an old friend. "Garrick," he said, "we've got a complication." On the other end, Garrick's reply was low and quick. The courthouse Chapane, some people called him. Others called him a fixer. He was a court officer with broad shoulders and a face that didn't give away what he was thinking. He worked security on paper. In reality, he worked leverage. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The judge is getting bold," Victor said. "And there's a clerk who's suddenly remembering what integrity looks like." A pause. Victor's eyes flicked toward the direction of Hale's chambers, not because he could see through walls, but because he could sense where danger gathered. "Handle it," Victor said. Then he ended the call and returned to Marla with the same calm smile, as if he'd just scheduled lunch. Marla looked at him with something complicated in her eyes. Fear, yes. Disgust, maybe. And underneath it, the uncomfortable recognition that she had already stepped too far into Victor's shadow to pretend she could simply walk away. Back in Hale's chambers, the knock came. "Enter," Hale said. Lena Park stepped inside like a woman walking into a storm she could smell. She kept her shoulders squared, but her hands betrayed her. One thumb rubbed against the side of her index finger over and over, a small, repetitive motion people didn't notice until they were trained to notice fear. She didn't sit until Hale nodded toward a chair. When she sat, she perched on the edge as if preparing to bolt. Hale studied her for a long moment. He didn't rush her. He let the silence do what it always did. Silence made liars talk too much. Silence made scared people reveal what mattered. "Miss Park," Hale said at last. "You left the courtroom when that child mentioned a log." Lena's eyes flicked up, then down again. "Your Honor, Don't," Hale said, not cruelly, but firmly. "Don't waste my time with excuses. Waste it with truth." Lena swallowed. Her throat worked. "It's not my place." "You think I don't know what pressure feels like?" Hale asked, his voice low. "You think you're the first person to sit in this building and tell yourself you're just doing your job?" Lena's eyes glistened, but she blinked hard, refusing to let tears turn into weakness. "They'll ruin me," she whispered. "They'll say I tampered. They'll say I stole. They'll say I—" "Who?" Hale said. Lena's breath shook. She looked toward the door as if expecting it to open, as if expecting someone to appear and drag her away. Then she forced herself to look at Hale. "Garrick," she said, and Mr. Lang's people." Hale felt a cold satisfaction slide through him, and beneath it, a deeper grief. Victor had roots everywhere. "What did you see?" Hale asked. Lena's voice went thin, fragile with the effort of speaking. "The chain of custody logs," she said. "The digital ones, the physical ones. They don't match. They haven't matched for weeks." Hale leaned forward slightly, and the movement sent pain through his hips, but he ignored it. "Who accessed the evidence outside proper hours?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then said it anyway. "Garrick." Hale's eyes narrowed. "And the prosecutor?" Lena flinched as if the name itself could hurt her. "Marla Dent," she whispered. "She told me it was for security review. She told me I'd be charged if I didn't cooperate." Hale sat back. He stared at Lena, and in that stare there was no judgment of her fear. Only the grim understanding of what fear did to decent people. Lena's voice broke. "I tried to fix it," she said. "I tried to keep copies. But he watches everything. He knows when I print. He knows when I log in. Hale's hands tightened on the armrests, because Hale knew exactly what Victor did. He didn't just threaten. He designed cages so that even breathing felt like permission. Hale looked at Lena's face, and for a moment he saw not just a clerk, but every person who had ever swallowed the truth because the truth felt too expensive. He also saw Noah, standing small and stubborn at the front of the courtroom, refusing to swallow anything. "Listen to me carefully," Hale said. "You are going to leave this chamber and act normal. You will not speak to anyone except when spoken to. You will not go anywhere alone today." Lena's eyes widened. "Your Honor." "I'm not finished," Hale said. He paused, choosing words like a man choosing a weapon he couldn't put down once lifted. "I am going to request the Foundation's records," Hale said. "Not as a suggestion, as an order. And I am going to request a forensic review of the digital trail." Lena's hands trembled. "They'll stop you." Hale's mouth tightened, and in that tightness lived years of anger he'd never allowed himself to use. "Let them try," he said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small notebook. He wrote a name, then another. He wrote a time. He wrote the phrase, "emergency protective detail." Lena watched him as if she was watching a man step onto ice that could crack. "You're risking everything," she whispered. Hale didn't deny it. He looked up at her, and the steel in his eyes softened for the briefest moment into something human. "I've already lost everything that mattered," he said. "I just didn't admit it." Lena's lips parted, but no words came out. Hale's voice lowered. "That boy," he said, and he didn't have to explain who he meant. He walked into that room and did what grown men have been too afraid to do. He slid the notebook back into the drawer, then looked toward the door as if he could see through it. "And now," Hale said, "they're going to come for him." Lena's face went pale. Hale's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked less like a judge and more like a man preparing for a fight. In the hallway outside, a set of footsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. Not the light steps of a clerk, not the respectful pause of a bailiff. Someone who walked like they belonged. Hale's eyes lifted, and something in his body shifted, a primitive instinct waking beneath years of restraint. Because even before the knock came, he knew. Garrick was on the other side of the door, and Garrick never showed up empty-handed. The knock came again, firmer this time, as if the wood itself were expected to cooperate. Judge Hale didn't answer right away. He sat in the stillness and listened, not to the sound, but to what lived behind it. Garrick's footsteps had a weight to them, the weight of a man who knew where cameras were and where they weren't. A man who understood which hallways belonged to the public and which belonged to the people who made the public story. Lena Park's face had gone so pale, Hale wondered if she might faint. Her eyes darted to the window, then to the door, as if she were calculating the chances of escape and finding none. Hale didn't look at her with pity. Pity made people smaller. He looked at her with something closer to instruction. "Stand up," he said quietly. "Walk to my bookshelf. Pick a title, any title. You're here because I asked you about a citation." Lena blinked, confused by the word choice, then obeyed because obedience was the only muscle fear hadn't stolen from her. She rose, moved to the shelves, and traced her fingers along the spines with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Hale rolled forward and called out, voice even, "Enter." Garrick stepped into the chamber like a man arriving on time for a meeting he'd scheduled himself. He filled the doorway with his shoulders first, then his smile. Polite, practiced, meant to communicate loyalty. His uniform was crisp. His belt sat heavy with tools that were supposed to represent safety. His eyes flicked to Lena, lingering a beat too long. "Your Honor," Garrick said, as if everything about this was normal. "Didn't realize you had company." Hale kept his expression flat. "Ms. Park is assisting me." Garrick's smile widened a fraction. "Of course." There was a pause where a lesser man would have filled the silence with explanation. Hale let it stretch. He watched Garrick's posture, the way his weight shifted toward the door, as if he was blocking it, without admitting he was blocking it. "What do you want?" Hale asked. Garrick's gaze moved to the desk, to the phone, to the papers Hale had not bothered to hide. Garrick's pupils tightened slightly, that tiny, involuntary sign of a mind calculating. "I'm hearing things in the hallway," Garrick said. "People are saying there's a disturbance. They're saying someone introduced evidence without proper procedure." Hale's voice stayed calm. "People in hallways say a lot of things." Garrick's smile held, but his tone changed, just a shade more intimate. "I'm looking out for you, Judge, for the court, for your reputation." Hale studied him. "My reputation survived a wheelchair. It will survive gossip." Garrick's eyes flicked again to Lena. "Ms. Park looks shaken." Lena stiffened. Her fingers tightened around a book spine as if she could anchor herself to it. Hale spoke without turning his head. "She's fine." Garrick took one step farther into the room, as if testing how much space he could claim. "I'd hate for anyone to misunderstand what's happening today. The public's already restless. We don't want to create a circus." Hale felt the old temptation rise, the temptation to compromise, to soften, to keep the machine running. He had spent years giving into that temptation because it allowed him to avoid war. But something in him had shifted. A child's voice in open court had made him remember that avoiding war didn't mean peace. Sometimes it meant surrender. "If you're concerned about misunderstanding," Hale said, "you can start by not hovering in my doorway." Garrick's smile faltered for the first time. "I'm just doing my job." "So am I," Hale replied. Garrick held Hale's gaze. The air between them tightened, thin and metallic. Then Garrick nodded slowly, as if conceding. "Understood," he said. "I'll return to the courtroom. Make sure things stay orderly." Hale watched him turn, watched the moment Garrick's eyes flicked to Lena one last time, a glance that carried a promise without words. When the door closed, Lena's breath came out in a shaky line. "He knows," she whispered. Hale didn't argue. He rolled to the phone again and dialed a different extension, one that bypassed the usual chain of command. The court security chief, an older man named Roscoe, who owed Victor nothing and trusted Hale only because Hale had once saved his son from a sentence that would have ruined him. "Roscoe," Hale said when the man answered, "I need 2 plainclothes officers at the defense table. Now. And I want Ms. Park escorted anywhere she goes." A beat of silence. Then, "Understood," Roscoe said. No questions. No speeches. Hale hung up and looked at Lena. "You're not going back to your desk alone." Her voice barely worked. "They'll think I told you." "They already do," Hale said. "The only difference is whether you live through it." Lena pressed her lips together, trying to hold herself in one piece. "Why are you doing this?" Hale's eyes drifted, not to the photo on his desk, but to the memory behind it. "Because I know what it feels like to be certain and wrong," he said, "and I'm done paying for it with other people's lives." In the corridor outside, Garrick walked away with the calm stride of a man who didn't need to hurry. But inside his chest, there was a small, sharp anger. Hale wasn't supposed to resist. Hale was supposed to be manageable. The chair had made him manageable. Victor had promised it would. Garrick pulled out his phone and typed with one hand as he walked. He sent one message. Now. Across town, in a cramped apartment above a closed-down barbershop, Caleb Rios stared at his laptop until his eyes burned. The screen showed columns of numbers that most people would mistake for boredom. To Caleb, they were footprints. They were fingerprints. They were a confession in a language only the right people could read. He had once built systems for Victor Lang's foundation, donor databases, transaction routing, internal audit dashboards. He had done it because he believed in the work. He had done it because Victor had looked him in the eye and said, "We take care of our people." Then Caleb learned what "our people" meant. He learned about the ghost ledger, an invisible second set of books that moved money through shell vendors, through consulting contracts, through emergency allocations that never reached anyone who needed them. He learned how easy it was to make theft look like administration. And when he tried to raise concerns, he didn't get fired. He got warned. Not with shouted threats, not with dramatic violence. With a polite meeting and a quiet reminder that his mother's address was public record. So Caleb ran, and running became his whole life. That morning, his burner phone vibrated. A number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it. Almost. Then he saw the voicemail icon appear immediately, as if the caller expected him not to answer. He listened. A woman's voice, controlled but shaking beneath the control. "My name is Lena Park," the message said. "I work at the courthouse. I don't have much time. There's a child involved. They're going to make him disappear into the story. If you ever wanted to fix what you helped build, call me back." Caleb stared at the phone until his hands began to sweat. A child. That word did something to him that fear alone had never managed to do. Fear made you hide. A child made you remember who you were before you started hiding. He called back. Lena answered on the second ring, breathless. "You heard it?" "Yes," Caleb said. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't used it for anything honest in a long time. "What do you need?" "What you have," Lena replied. "Something that ties it to him. Something they can't spin." Caleb looked at his laptop. He thought about Victor's smile, about the way the foundation banners read like gospel while the money bled out the back door. "I have logs," he said. "Not from the court, from inside. Metadata, routing history, deleted entries. It's ugly." "Can you come to the courthouse?" Lena asked. And even as she asked, she sounded like she already knew the answer. Caleb's chest tightened. "If I walk into that building, I might not walk out." "We can meet somewhere else," Lena said. "Near the courthouse, somewhere public." Caleb hesitated. Public hadn't saved him before. But then he remembered the last line of her message. "There's a child involved." "Tell me where," he said. Back at the courthouse, the recess ended, and the courtroom refilled with an energy that had sharpened into certainty. People didn't just want a verdict now. They wanted a twist. They wanted a villain to unmask in front of them so they could feel righteous for having watched. Ethan sat at the defense table with Noah beside him, trying to speak softly, trying to keep his voice steady enough that Noah wouldn't feel the tremor underneath. "You can't run into places like this," Ethan murmured. "If they hurt you." "I didn't come to be safe," Noah whispered back. "I came because you weren't safe." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at his son and saw the same stubbornness he'd once admired in his own father. Before sickness softened the old man's body, and life demanded more surrender than pride could afford. Noah's eyes kept darting around the room. He wasn't watching the judge. He wasn't watching the prosecutor. He was watching Victor. Victor sat behind Marla with a face that looked almost sorrowful, like this was all breaking his heart. Yet every now and then, his gaze would flick toward Noah with something quiet and warning in it. Not rage, not fear. Ownership. Noah's small hand slid into Ethan's under the table. Ethan squeezed it once, hard, as if that could substitute for protection. Judge Hale returned, wheeled into position, his robe settling around him like a curtain. His face was the same, carved and cold. But his eyes held a new focus, the focus of a man who has finally decided to stop being careful. "Proceed," Hale said. Marla rose again, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Your Honor, we must address the improper presentation of evidence." "You will," Hale replied, "after I address something else." Marla's mouth tightened. Hale's gaze swept the room, then fixed on Victor Lang. "Mr. Lang," Hale said, "you are present in this courtroom, and your foundation is central to the allegations. The court will hear from your custodian of records, immediately." Victor's smile didn't move. "Your Honor, we're cooperating fully, but that's highly unusual." "Today is unusual," Hale said. Victor's eyes narrowed by a fraction. "My staff can be here later this afternoon." Hale's voice stayed calm. "Now." A stir moved through the gallery. Victor's reputation had always been a shield. Watching a judge press against that shield felt like watching a fist dent steel. Victor leaned slightly toward Marla, murmuring something too quiet to hear. Marla nodded, her face tight. She looked toward the side door, signaling someone. And from the corner of the room, Noah saw Garrick. Garrick stood near the wall, arms crossed, watching the defense table with a look that made Noah's stomach twist. Garrick wasn't smiling. He didn't have to. His presence was a reminder that grown-ups had other ways to enforce their will besides laughter. Noah's fingers tightened around Ethan's hand. He leaned close and whispered, "He's the one who scares people." Ethan's eyes followed Noah's gaze. He went still. He had noticed Garrick before. Everyone in the courthouse noticed him. But he had never understood the man's true job until Noah said it out loud. At that moment, Roscoe's plainclothes officers moved into place at the edge of the defense table. They weren't dramatic. They didn't draw weapons. They simply stood where they could be seen. A quiet wall between Noah and the kind of harm that never made it into the public record. Noah exhaled a little. Not relief exactly, but the faint sense that the room's teeth had been blunted. In a small cafe 2 blocks away, Lena sat in the back booth with her coat still on, eyes scanning every entry and exit. She looked like a woman waiting for a friend. She felt like a woman waiting for a sentence. Caleb arrived 10 minutes late. Not because he didn't care, but because he had circled the block twice, watching for tails. He wore a baseball cap low and kept his shoulders hunched like he was trying to become forgettable. He slid into the booth without greeting. He placed a thin envelope on the table like it might explode. Inside were printouts, transaction hashes, server access logs, timestamps that didn't align with the Foundation's public audit trail. A map of theft drawn in a language most people never learned. Lena's hands hovered over the envelope, then pulled it closer. "This is enough," she whispered, half to him and half to herself. Caleb's eyes were bloodshot. "It's enough to get someone killed," he said. "You understand that, right?" Lena swallowed. "A boy is already in danger." Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked out the window toward the courthouse roofline, as if he could see the courtroom through stone. "Then get it to the judge," he said. Not to the prosecutor, not to the police, to the judge. Lena nodded quickly, already thinking through routes and cameras and which hallway doors had keycard access. Caleb leaned forward, voice dropping. And listen, if anything feels wrong, you don't keep walking. You turn around. Lena met his eyes. They already know I'm wrong, she said. That's the point. She slipped the envelope into her bag and stood. Caleb stood too, then stopped, hand hovering as if he wanted to say something more. But what do you say to a stranger you've asked to carry your truth into a building full of predators? He said the only thing that mattered. Be careful. Lena left the cafe and headed toward the courthouse. She didn't see the man across the street who turned and began to follow. She didn't notice the second man, who waited near the courthouse steps, leaning against the railing like he was killing time. Inside the courtroom, Victor Lang's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He didn't look at it. He didn't need to. He already knew the message would be simple. Handled. Lena crossed the street, bag clutched against her side. She tried to keep her pace normal. She tried to look like every other worker returning from lunch. Halfway up the courthouse steps, someone brushed past her shoulder, hard enough to jolt her, quick enough to feel accidental. She clutched her bag tighter, heart skipping. She reached the top step. The glass doors were 10 feet away. Then a hand caught her wrist. Not violently, not with spectacle. With the quiet certainty of someone who knew she couldn't scream without making herself the story. Lena turned and saw Garrick's face, close enough that she could smell his aftershave. You look tired, Garrick said softly, almost kindly. Lena's throat went dry. Let go. Garrick's grip tightened by a fraction. You've been having a stressful day, he continued. People do silly things under stress. They misplace items, they forget procedures, they hurt themselves. Her bag strap bit into her shoulder. Lena tried to pull away, but Garrick's hand was steady, practiced. He leaned in, voice low enough that no one else could hear. Give me the bag. Lena's mind raced. If she surrendered it, the evidence vanished. If she fought, she would be dragged into an incident, and the evidence would vanish anyway. And inside the building, a child was sitting at a defense table, believing adults could still be brave. Lena made her choice the way frightened people sometimes do. Fast, sharp, with a spark of anger that surprised even her. She lifted her free hand and slapped Garrick across the face. It wasn't a loud slap. It wasn't cinematic. It was a desperate, human act. For a moment, Garrick's eyes flashed with something ugly. Lena yanked her wrist free and ran through the doors. Her bag bounced against her hip. Her lungs burned. The guard at the lobby desk started to rise, startled. Garrick followed, not running, never running. Because predators didn't chase in public when they could corner in private. Lena sprinted toward the staff hallway that led behind the courtroom. She reached for her keycard with shaking hands. And behind her, the men Victor had sent began to close the distance. In the courtroom, Noah watched Judge Hale with wide eyes. He didn't understand all the legal language, but he understood bodies. He understood tension. He understood when the room was about to turn. Judge Hale's gaze flicked toward the side door, as if he'd felt something change in the building's bloodstream. Ethan leaned close to Noah. If I tell you to run, you run, he whispered. Noah's voice came out thin. I'm not leaving you. Ethan's grip tightened. That wasn't a request. At the bench, Hale's hands tightened on the armrests again. He didn't know what was happening in the hallway yet, but he could feel it. And so could Victor Lang, who sat perfectly still, eyes calm, smile faint, as if the world had already returned to order. A second later, the side door behind the bench cracked open. Lena stumbled into view, hair loose, face flushed, eyes wild with terror. She clutched her bag like it was her heart. Behind her, Garrick appeared in the doorway with a look of mild irritation, like a man retrieving something that belonged to him. For one breathless second, the entire courtroom watched the tableau without understanding it. Then Hale's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. "Stop," he said. Lena froze, shaking. Garrick didn't. And Noah, seeing the way Garrick's hand reached toward Lena's bag, felt the same knot in his chest tighten into something dangerous and bright. Because this wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was about whether the truth would be allowed to enter the room alive. Judge Hale's single word did not sound loud, but it landed as if the entire room had been struck into stillness. "Stop!" Lena stood near the side door behind the bench, chest heaving, hair fallen loose from the neat style she always wore. The courtroom had never seen her like this. Clerks were meant to be invisible. They were the gears, not the story. But now she was the story, and the fear in her eyes was so raw it made even the curious faces in the gallery tighten with discomfort. Garrick paused, one hand hovering near Lena's bag strap. His expression wore the mild irritation of a man interrupted mid-task. He kept his posture casual, almost respectful, like he was doing the judge a favor by standing still. Victor Lang, seated behind Marla, didn't move at all. His calm was not relief. It was calculation. The kind of calm that came from believing every room had an exit if you knew the right door. Ethan rose halfway from his chair, then stopped. The plainclothes officers at his table shifted, ready. Noah leaned forward, small fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles shone. Hale's gaze locked on Garrick. "You are not authorized to touch court staff or their property in open court," Hale said, voice level, eyes cold. "Step back." Garrick's smile appeared, thin and controlled. "Your Honor, she's upset. She ran into the courtroom. I was just trying to—" "You were trying to take her bag," Hale cut in. Garrick's eyes narrowed a fraction. "I was trying to ensure nothing compromised the proceedings." Hale's mouth tightened, as if he tasted something bitter. "The proceedings are compromised by people who confuse this building with their personal workshop." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Not laughter this time, something sharper, a collective sense that the air was turning. People leaned forward. Even Marla Dent, who had returned to her seat with the stiff composure of someone trying to reassemble her case, looked unsettled. Hale turned his head slightly. "Ms. Park," he said, and his voice softened just enough to become dangerous. Because kindness from a man like Hale meant he had decided something. "Bring the bag to the clerk's desk, slowly." Lena's eyes flicked to Garrick, then to Hale. She moved as if her legs belonged to someone else. Step by step, she crossed the strip of floor between the side door and the bench, feeling every gaze in the room on her back. Garrick took one instinctive half-step after her. The plainclothes officer nearest the defense table moved in front of him without a word. A quiet wall. Garrick stopped. His jaw tightened. Hale watched Garrick's reaction like a man reading a confession in muscle. When Lena reached the clerk's desk, she set the bag down with shaking hands. The clerk looked to Hale for direction. Hale nodded. "Open it," he said. Marla stood quickly. "Your Honor, if this is evidence, we need counsel." "You are counsel," Hale replied, not looking at her. "Stand there and watch. That is your role today." Marla's face flushed. Her pride flared, but she swallowed it, because the room had changed and she could feel it. The audience wasn't with her anymore. The story she'd built, clean thief, noble charity, had started to crumble. And the worst part was that it wasn't crumbling because of an opposing attorney's brilliance. It was crumbling because a child had dragged the truth into daylight, and the judge had allowed it to breathe. The clerk unzipped the bag. Inside were folders, loose papers, and a sealed envelope that looked like it had been handled too many times with too much caution. The clerk lifted the envelope out and hesitated. Hale's eyes stayed on it. "What is that?" Lena's voice came out thin. "Records," she said. "From the foundation, from inside their system. A man named Caleb Rios gave them to me." Victor's posture changed. Barely. His shoulders remained relaxed, but the skin at his throat tightened, the way a man's body reacts before his mind admits fear. Hale didn't miss it. He leaned forward slightly in his chair, and for a moment the public saw what they were never meant to see. That leaning cost him. The smallest movement was a transaction with pain. Yet he did it anyway. "Hand it to me," Hale said. The clerk brought the envelope to the bench. Hale took it with both hands, as if he understood the weight of paper could be heavier than stone. He broke the seal. Inside were printouts and a flash drive. Not polished exhibits, not legal theater, just raw data. Server access logs, routing paths, timestamps, transaction hashes that meant nothing to most people in the room and meant everything to a person who understood systems. The truth in a language designed to be ignored. Hale's eyes scanned the top page. His expression did not change, but something in his gaze deepened, like a man looking down into a well and finally seeing how far it went. Marla leaned forward to spite herself. "Your Honor, those could be fabricated." Hale lifted his eyes to her. "Everything can be fabricated," he said. "That is why we look for patterns." He tapped the paper once. These logs show repeated access to internal financial routing after hours, followed by modified audit outputs. That is not a child's fantasy. That is infrastructure. Marla's lips parted. She closed them again. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out of a trap she hadn't realized she'd stepped into. Victor's voice came smooth, careful. "Judge Hale, with respect, you're stepping outside the bounds of a criminal fraud trial. This looks like a civil dispute at best." Hale turned his head toward him, slow as a man turning toward an old ghost. "Mr. Lang," Hale said, "you have sat in my courtroom like a saint watching a sinner be punished. You have smiled at the public like you are here for justice." Victor's smile flickered. "Because I am." Hale's voice stayed calm, which was the most frightening part. "Then you won't mind a forensic review of your foundation's digital records. You won't mind an independent audit with court oversight. You won't mind subpoenas for your vendor contracts, shell entities, and internal access logs." Victor's smile tightened. "Your Honor." Hale lifted a hand, cutting him off. "And you won't mind," Hale continued, "that this court is ordering an immediate preservation of evidence. No deletions, no alterations, no maintenance. Anything that disappears after this moment will be treated as intentional obstruction." The gallery went quiet in a different way now. Not because they feared being scolded, because they sensed they were watching a man step onto a ledge. Ethan's eyes shone with a hope he didn't trust. His body still felt like it was braced for impact, but his heart began to do something reckless. Noah stared at Hale as if watching someone do magic. Noah didn't know what subpoenas were, but he understood something else. The judge was looking at Victor the way Noah had wanted everyone to look at him, like a lie. Hale's gaze shifted back to Garrick. "Officer Garrick," he said. Garrick straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." "You will place your phone on the clerk's desk," Hale said. For the first time, Garrick's calm faltered. "My phone?" "Your phone," Hale repeated. "Now." Marla's head snapped toward Hale. "Your Honor, that's—" Hale didn't let her finish. "The chain of custody issue Ms. Park described includes after-hours access and coordination. If Mr. Garrick has nothing to hide, his phone will confirm it." Garrick's nostrils flared. His eyes flashed toward Victor for the briefest moment. Victor did not respond, not with a nod, not with a glance. Nothing. It was a silent abandonment, and Garrick felt it like a hand withdrawing support. Garrick swallowed. "Your Honor, I'm a court officer. This is inappropriate." Hale's voice dropped half a degree. "So was trying to seize an envelope from a clerk in open court. Place the phone on the desk." The room held its breath. Garrick's hand moved slowly to his belt. He took out his phone as if it weighed a pound more than it should. He walked to the clerk's desk. He placed it down. Hale watched him with eyes that didn't blink. "Thank you," Hale said. "Now step away." Garrick backed up, the faintest tremor running through his jaw. He could feel the walls shifting around him. He had lived his life in hallways where no one asked questions. Now he was standing in a room full of witnesses. Hale turned to the clerk. "Call Roscoe," he said. "Bring him to my courtroom, and contact the state investigator assigned to judicial integrity cases. Tell them to come immediately." Marla's face went rigid. "Your Honor, you're turning this into what it already is?" Hale asked. And now there was something in his voice that carried older anger, older shame. "This building exists because people believe the law can see through power. If it can't, then we are not a court. We are decoration." He paused, and the pause was heavy. In that moment, Hale felt the weight of every time he had chosen convenience over truth. He felt the old man's note, 3 words in a shaking hand, press against the inside of his chest. "I tried." Hale looked down at the envelope again. He looked at Noah. Noah stared back, wide-eyed, terrified, stubborn. A child who had already learned that adults sometimes needed to be dragged toward decency. Hale's hands tightened on the armrests. For years, the chair had been his boundary, his excuse, his shield. But now the chair felt like something else. A cage. Victor Lang watched Hale with the faintest tilt of his head, as if studying whether the judge was truly willing to burn the whole stage down. Victor's smile returned, slow and patient, and his voice came soft as velvet. "You're emotional today," Victor said. "That's understandable. But emotion isn't evidence." Hale's eyes lifted, and for a moment the room felt like it had gone colder. "No," Hale said. "Emotion isn't evidence. It's motive. It's why people do what they do when no one is watching." He gripped the armrests again. He leaned forward, the motion making his shoulders tense. Pain lanced through him, immediate and familiar, like a guard dog baring its teeth. And then Hale did something he had not done in front of this many eyes in years. He shifted his weight. His feet, his useless feet, pressed against the floorboard of the chair. The muscles didn't respond the way they used to. His legs were dead weight, a stubborn refusal. The room watched, confused at first, then silent. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Noah's eyes widened. "Dad," he whispered without meaning to, voice trembling as if the word itself could steady the universe. Hale's hands tightened until his knuckles went pale. He didn't rise. Not yet. But he lifted himself enough that the chair creaked under the strain, enough that the audience saw the intent. saw the fight, saw the man inside the robe refuse to remain a symbol. Hale's voice came out strained, quieter than before. "I will not," he said, and every word sounded like it cost him something. "Be seated while a child begs adults to do what they promise to be." He sank back down, breath controlled, face composed again. But the room had already changed, because the wheelchair had stopped being a fact of life. It had become a question. And everyone in that courtroom, even Victor Lang, could feel the answer creeping closer. The room didn't erupt the way courtrooms did on television. There were no dramatic gasps, no people leaping to their feet in chaos. What spread through the courtroom was quieter and somehow more violent, a slow, collective realization that the story everyone had come to watch had changed hands. Judge Hale sat behind the bench as if he had never strained against the chair a moment ago. His face returned to its familiar stone. But the room had already seen the human beneath it, and that made his stillness feel less like coldness and more like discipline. Lena stood near the clerk's desk, trembling, her bag now empty, except for the fear she couldn't set down. Garrick stood a few paces away, hands at his sides, posture straight. The expression on his face held too tightly to be natural. Marla Dent remained standing, her legal instincts fighting her pride. Victor Lang stayed seated, the picture of calm, as if calm could reassert control by sheer repetition. Hale's gaze moved from the envelope to the clerk, then to the defense table. Ethan's hand rested on Noah's shoulder. Noah didn't sit fully. He hovered at the edge of the bench seat, body angled forward, as if he could physically hold the truth in the room by refusing to relax. Hale spoke. "This court is issuing immediate orders." He didn't say it like a man making a choice. He said it like a man naming weather. "First," Hale continued, "all digital records and related devices associated with the Lang Foundation are to be preserved. Any deletion or alteration from this moment will be treated as obstruction." Victor's smile held. "Your Honor, you're making a spectacle." Hale didn't look at him. "Spectacles are for people who need attention. I need facts." He nodded once to the clerk. "Call the state investigator. Put it on speaker." The clerk's hands shook as she dialed. When the line connected, a woman's voice answered, businesslike and wary, as if she'd learned long ago that emergency calls were rarely clean. "This is Investigator Simone Klein." Hale spoke into the microphone without softening his tone. "Investigator Klein, you are needed in my courtroom for an active integrity matter involving evidence handling, digital tampering, and possible obstruction. You will arrive immediately." A pause. "Understood, Your Honor. I'm on my way." Hale ended the call. Victor finally shifted, crossing one leg over the other. The movement looked relaxed, but it was a performance. He was buying time. "What exactly do you think you're proving?" Victor asked. "A few logs, some numbers on paper. I have teams of auditors. I have donors. I have a record of service." Hale lifted his eyes to Victor then, slow and steady. "You have a record of what you wanted people to see," Hale said. Victor's smile turned sympathetic. "Raymond, you're tired. You're letting a child's panic." "Don't," Hale said quietly. "One word, a warning, not a shout." Victor's eyes narrowed by a fraction, and Hale saw the impatience behind the charm, the part of Victor that had never believed rules applied to him. Hale turned his gaze to Marla. "Ms. Dent, you built your case on records you assumed were authentic." Marla's chin lifted. "They were obtained through proper channels." Hale's voice stayed even. Proper channels that Ms. Park has now stated were accessed outside approved hours by an officer of this court. Marla's jaw tightened. Her eyes flicked toward Garrick, then away. Allegations. Hale nodded once. Yes, allegations. That is why we verify them. He lifted the top printout from the envelope and held it up. This is a server access timeline. It shows repeated after-hours changes to audit output files. The same access signature appears across multiple dates. He lowered the paper and looked directly at Garrick. Officer Garrick, Hale said, did you access the evidence repository after hours? Garrick's mouth tightened. Your Honor, Hale didn't allow him space to build a story. Yes or no? Garrick's eyes flicked toward Victor for a fraction of a second, and the entire room saw it. Even those who didn't understand the significance felt it in their gut. A man checking his handler. Victor didn't move. Garrick's throat bobbed. Yes, he said finally, but it was for security. Marla exhaled sharply, as if her lungs had been holding anger and denial since morning. Hale's gaze didn't leave Garrick. Whose security? Garrick swallowed. The court's. Hale's voice sharpened slightly, not loud, just cutting. Then you won't mind explaining why your phone contains messages coordinating handling a clerk who carried records into this courtroom. A hush fell. Garrick's face drained of color. That's... Hale lifted a hand. Your phone is on the desk. It will be examined. Victor's voice slid in. Your Honor, this is turning into an inquisition. Hale's eyes flicked to Victor. It's turning into accountability, he replied. Victor leaned forward a fraction. His tone remained calm, but the steel beneath it began to show. And what about Ethan Cole? Are we all just forgetting the missing funds because of a melodramatic child and a nervous clerk? Hale looked at Ethan. Ethan stood slowly, as if he were afraid sudden motion would make the room misunderstand him again. His voice came out low, rough. I didn't take anything, Ethan said. I begged them to audit my accounts. I begged them to look at the vendor payments. They told me it would harm the mission. Victor's smile flashed. He's lying to save himself. Noah's small body went rigid. He started to rise. Ethan's hand tightened on his shoulder, but Noah was past being held down by gentle hands. He's not lying, Noah said, voice trembling. You told him Grandpa would get hurt? A murmur spread. Not laughter this time, something uncomfortable. Because now it wasn't about money. It was about a family. Victor sighed, as if exhausted by childish exaggeration. Children misunderstand adult conversations. Noah's eyes filled, but he did not cry. He stared at Victor with the stubborn focus of someone who had learned that polite adults could still be monsters. I heard you, Noah said. I heard you say it. Victor looked at Noah the way a man looks at a stain on his sleeve. Annoyed, but not afraid. Then Hale spoke again, and this time his voice carried something more personal, something that made the air tighten. Mr. Lang, Hale said, do you remember the case of Alan Mercer? Victor's smile froze for the first time. Not fully, but enough that anyone watching closely could see the hesitation. Marla frowned. Your Honor, what does that have to do with... Hale ignored her. Ethan had no idea who Alan Mercer was. Noah didn't either. But Victor did. Hale continued, voice calm. A mid-level manager, a man convicted on evidence that looked clean and final, a man who died before his appeal. Victor's eyes didn't blink. I don't recall. Hale nodded, as if expecting the lie. You should, because you sat in my office and told me justice had to be efficient. You told me the mission mattered more than one man's life. Victor's smile returned, weaker now. You're confused. Hale's gaze hardened. I'm awake. The courtroom went so still that even the people in the gallery seemed afraid of the sound of their own breathing. Hale leaned forward, and the movement again cost him. His shoulders tightened, his hands gripping the armrests, until the leather creased beneath his fingers. His eyes stayed locked on Victor, and the years between them, years of silence and compromise, seemed to collapse into a single moment. You've been hiding behind charities and rhetoric for too long, Hale said. You weaponize pity. You weaponize need. And you choose men like Ethan because you assume they'll be too ashamed to fight back. Victor's jaw tightened. Careful, Judge. Hale's mouth twisted slightly, not into a smile, but into something like grim recognition. That's what you used to say, Hale murmured, right before you called it fate. Victor's calm cracked at the edges. His eyes flashed, a glimpse of anger breaking through the polish. Hale turned to the clerk. Play the second audio file from the USB. Marla's head snapped up. There's more? The clerk's fingers trembled over the trackpad. The file began. This time, the recording was clearer. It sounded like it had been captured closer, maybe in a car, maybe in a quiet room. Victor's voice was unmistakable now. Smooth, controlled, carrying the same gentle authority he used on stage. You're going to do the right thing, Victor said on the recording. Sign it. Let the public believe what it needs to believe, and you'll keep your father. Then, after a pause, Victor's voice lowered, the mask slipping into something colder. And if the judge starts asking questions, we remind him what happened the last time he tried to be brave. The clip ended. The courtroom didn't move. Even Marla stood frozen, the color gone from her face. She wasn't looking at Ethan anymore. She was looking at Victor as if seeing him for the first time. Victor didn't speak. For the first time all day, he had no performance ready that could erase what everyone had just heard. Hale's eyes stayed on Victor. Do you want to explain that, Mr. Lang? Victor's throat worked. He forced a small laugh, the kind of laugh people use when they believe laughter can still control a room. This is fabricated, he said. This is... Stop, Hale said. And this time the words sounded like a door slamming shut. Hale turned his gaze to Marla. Miss Dent, you will sit down. Marla's lips parted, then closed. Slowly, she sat. Hale turned back to the room. This court is suspending proceedings on the charges against Ethan Cole, pending an integrity investigation. Mr. Cole will be released under court protection today. Ethan's knees almost gave out. His hand tightened on Noah's shoulder, and for a second, he looked like a man who didn't know what to do with oxygen after being underwater. Noah's breath shook. He stared at his father like he was afraid the words would vanish if he blinked. Victor's face hardened. You can't do this. Hale's voice turned colder. I can, and I am. At that moment, the side door opened again, and Roscoe entered with 2 officers behind him. They didn't look theatrical. They looked tired. They looked like men who had seen what corruption did to people and had decided, at least today, not to be part of it. Roscoe approached the bench. Hale spoke quietly to him, then nodded toward Victor. Roscoe's eyes narrowed. He motioned to the officers. Victor stood abruptly, anger flashing now. This is absurd. The officers moved toward him. Victor's voice rose. You have no authority. Hale's voice cut through, calm and absolute. Sit down, Mr. Lang. You are no longer the one controlling the story. Victor's breath came fast, a crack in the composure. For the first time, the public saw the man beneath the saint costume. His eyes flicked toward Garrick. Do something, Victor hissed, not caring now who heard. Garrick didn't move, because Garrick knew when a ship had begun to sink. He knew when the man who had promised him protection had become a liability. Victor's face shifted into something that looked like betrayal. And then it turned into fear. The officers took Victor by the arms and guided him toward the side exit, not violently, but firmly. The room watched, stunned, as the philanthropic hero was walked out like an ordinary suspect. Ethan's breath broke into a quiet sound that was half laugh and half sob. He bent down, forehead touching Noah's hair the way he had earlier, only now it wasn't prayer. It was gratitude. Noah's arms went around his father's waist, clinging like he could keep the world from stealing him again. Hale watched them for a long moment. Something in his chest tightened, not pain this time. Something closer to longing. Because he remembered the man in the old case. He remembered the note. He remembered the way he had sat behind a bench and told himself he was doing his job while a family fell apart. He had not fixed that. He could not fix that. But he could refuse to repeat it. The courtroom began to stir again, voices rising in confused waves. People leaned toward each other, hungry to tell the story outside. The headlines would be savage. The city would buzz. Victor's donors would panic. The foundation would fracture. Hale lifted a hand, and the noise lowered. He looked down at Noah. The boy looked up at him, eyes red, face pale, still brave, in the exhausted way only children could be after fear. Hale's voice softened, barely. "You said you'd make me walk?" Noah's throat worked. I just wanted you to listen." Hale nodded once. He glanced down at his hands gripping the armrests. For years, he had treated the chair as punishment, as proof that he didn't deserve to stand tall. And yet, today, he had used it as a bench for truth. He had used his position to do what he should have done long ago. He let out a slow breath. Then, without announcing it, without turning it into a spectacle, Hale moved his feet again, pressed them against the floor, shifted his weight forward. Pain flared. Not the phantom pain, not the distant ache. A real sharp signal from muscles that had been sleeping, from nerves that had not fully died but had been buried under fear and disuse. Hale's hands tightened. His shoulders braced. He pushed. The chair creaked. And this time, he rose higher than before. Not a full stand, not a miracle, a struggle, a man forcing his body to try. The gallery went silent again, not because they were entertained, but because something in the act felt private, almost sacred, like watching a man lift a weight he'd been too ashamed to touch. Hale's breath came controlled, but his face, just for a second, showed strain. He held himself there, hovering above the chair, trembling. Then he lowered back down slowly, jaw clenched, eyes steady. Noah stared, stunned. Hale looked at him and spoke quietly, so quietly the microphones barely caught it. "You didn't make me walk," Hale said. "You made me stop hiding." Noah's eyes shimmered. His voice came out small. "Is my dad really going home?" Ethan squeezed Noah's shoulder. "We're going home," he whispered, as if saying it softly made it safer. Hale nodded once. "Court is adjourned," Hale said, voice returning to iron. "And this court will remember today." The gavel fell. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Ethan and Noah stood together, surrounded by officers now, guided toward the exit with the kind of protection that felt unreal. The crowd parted, and for the first time since morning, the faces in the gallery didn't look hungry. They looked ashamed. Victor Lang disappeared through the side door, his perfect story finally cracking into the light. And behind the bench, Judge Raymond Hale sat in his chair, staring at the spot on the floor where his feet had pressed. He did not feel healed. He felt awake, and sometimes awakening was the first step. If this story hit you in the chest the way it hit me, I want to hear one thing from you. Was Judge Hale right to step in, risking his career to protect a child and stop a powerful man? Or should a judge never cross that line, no matter what? Drop your answer in the comments. I read them, and I really do choose future stories based on what you say. And if you enjoy slow-burn courtroom dramas with a twist you don't see coming, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because the next story is already waiting, and it's even harder to forget.